There we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Cat Shieh. Thanks to Michelle, as you know, I'm here to host not one, but 4 workshops for this organization. And so when Michelle and I were talking, we wanted to first talk about what is racism and also what is systemic racism. So just so you know, I will ask you all to be able to talk and also be able to type things on your Zoom. So I will ask for that participation, and I will also give you the instructions to do so and when. So welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be able to be with you all here tonight. So today we're going to be talking about systemic racism and what we can do about it. So just so you know, I want to introduce myself very quickly. My name is Cat Shieh. 我的国语的名字是谢婉莹. And I used to be a teacher, as you can see on the right-hand side here. I used to be a high school teacher, and I taught ethnic studies, which is the study about race and people of color. And I also used to work in politics. And I've also done trainings during the time of the anti-Asian violence, specifically in 2020 and 2021. I used to work in Asian American civil rights. I first heard about this organization and Michelle through APALI, Asian Pacific American Leadership Institute. If you have not joined, I highly recommend it. So something that I really want to make sure that we are able to address is there is racism everywhere, right? And I think oftentimes people don't actually realize that systemic racism is a specific type of racism, right? So why do we need to learn how to identify different types of racism? As you can see here, I have a question for you all. And what I am going to ask you to do is try to answer this question. Why do you think we need to learn how to identify different types, all types of racism? I'll let you all think about it. And I actually would like you all to come up with one answer. Please just let us know if you're going to type it or if you're going to share it verbally. So I'm going to just be silent for about 30 seconds. Why do we need to learn how to identify, notice different types of racism? 30 seconds. Beautiful. That's about 30 seconds. Laura, it looks like you said to make things better. And Laura, if you can just share, are you talking about making things better for you or for others or both? Or Jan said, in order to protect everyone's rights, right? Like our own and other people. And that's going to be really important for us to remember. When we're protected, we can feel like other people are protected. When other people are protected, we can feel protected too. Sure. And then Laura, do you feel like it's for everyone or just like yourself?
It's for everyone. It's like when we say, it's almost like a little cliche when you say, like a little kitschy when you say to make the world a better place. But I think that is, what all this anti-racism work is about. And I think it's really important.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate you also like being able to verbally share that, right? Something I'm noticing is like, you didn't just talk, like no one in the chat is saying like only them, right? Michelle is saying we're such a unique type of country. We're very diverse ethnically, racially, in so many different ways. How do we actually all get along with each other? One for all for one. And the reason why I think it's so important for us to notice that we're saying everyone and each other is because a lot of people actually think identifying racism is only for themselves and only for their children, right? Also creating this idea that like, I'm more important than other people, rather than thinking we're all in this together. That does make this work easier, I believe. So that being said, I did ask you all to share like how you are like noticing, like, why is it important for us to notice racism? Now I'm actually going to ask you to identify it for yourself. So this is actually not the total scale, but actually all of these things have to do with racism. As you can see on the right-hand side, that's where you're like the least racist. This is the part that you want to get to, actually. You're being an active participant in fighting racism. And then as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, this is where we're talking about the fact that like, this is like very obvious racism. I think one of the problems is many times people say only the obvious forms of racism matter. So then we're totally okay when people make fun of Chinese food, that people butcher our last names or our first names, that it doesn't really matter whether or not our kids go to Chinese school or Japanese school or learning languages, or that school is English only, right? Like there are so many different types of racism, some more obvious than others. We all need to catch all forms of it. So as I mentioned, the left side is the obvious forms of racism. The right side is actually where we want to get to. So what I am actually going to ask you to do is identify which ones you're confused about. How is it a form of racism? I want you to tell me which ones you've done yourself. And let's see where we can, well, let's see what kind of discussions come up for us. So again, if you want to place it in the chat, you're more than welcome to. If you want to verbalize it, you're more than welcome to. I'm going to continue to narrate. And as I had mentioned, I would love to get every single person's participation in this. Verbally or chat, I'll give you about 30 seconds to like think about it, write things down, or be able to share after the 30 seconds. Which ones have you done? Which ones you're confused about? Beautiful. It looks like we're starting to notice some things, right? Something that I want you to note, so something I want you to take note of is as I am talking about each of the ones that you're putting in the chat, please write down some notes of whatever it is you're learning, okay? So the first one is this idea that there's only one race, the human race. This is racist because not only does it, right, like important to distinguish race from ethnicity, but this idea that there's only one race ignores the whole history of how people have been mistreated, right? Yes, we are all a part of the human race, but the reality is that we've all been treated differently for random reasons we don't really deserve. Right? So yes, although it might be true we're the human race, we do treat humans differently, and that's not natural and not okay, right? So saying that kind of thing There's only one race. How is that a form of ignoring, actively ignoring and denying the very real history and the present day of what's happening, right? So given that, I think I will move on and come back to the point. I think it's important for us to see in what ways people view Asian as being white adjacent. How is that racism? To what degree can it be true? And to what degree does the idea of being Asian actually ignore lots of different ways in which we can be Asian? Something I definitely notice is that many East Asian folks, right, like Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Taiwanese folks, I myself am Taiwanese, right? Sometimes East Asians forget that Southeast Asians exist and South Asians exist, right? Like Indian, Pakistani, Kazakhstan, and whatnot. And so I think it's important for us to realize in what ways does the Asian American community and the Asian community in the United States actually have a large span of different kinds of history and experiences. Asian Americans here in this country are actually the most educated and the least educated groups of people in this country. We are the most, for people of color, we are some of the highest earners and actually some of the poorest at the same time. We're actually one of the fastest growing poor communities here in the United States. I think it's important for us to go back to, Jian, what you had mentioned. You're talking about an anthropological perspective. That may be true, but that is not how the world sees this. What usually ends up happening is that regardless of what is or isn't science, it becomes used as a weapon, as a tool to justify how people should be treated differently. That's what this racism scale is about. How all of these different phrases, regardless of whatever it is, we mean it or don't mean it, or I wasn't trying to be offensive, the reality is, from a sociology perspective, is that regardless of whatever it is we mean behind these things, it comes from a place where it can become a tool to become a weapon to justify oppressing others. Because we're biologically different, therefore, some people are not allowed to have certain jobs and should not go to certain colleges. That becomes part of the history. Right? What ends up happening is that if we say, oh, if we can't use the N-word, maybe they shouldn't either, it ends up becoming justification to do other harmful things. Should that be the case? I'm not saying that should be the case. But what ends up happening as a result is this unequalness, right? Someone had mentioned it's important to distinguish biases versus racism. Some people actually argue against this. Some people believe that biases and racism, they can be the same thing. Some people say that they're different, right? It's always important to remember at the end of the day, what we're trying to make sure is not just the fact that we all can be, is the fact we all together can and need to work on it, right? Someone said, I hear people say, I don't see color. Regardless of whether or not you see it, it's the reality of how our world works, right? Regardless of you do see color, you don't see color, at the end of the day, color has and continues to be used in a way that hurts us and other people. Does this hurt white people? Sure, they don't get to see the beautiful communities that they could be a part of because we're segregated. Does it hurt us? Yeah, because it can, kind of like we were saying, like cheapen our community and whatnot. So the second thing that I want to talk about is we don't want to talk about simply racism. We want to talk about how this turns out in terms of systems, right? So as you can see here, what it says is that people believe that racism is done by individuals. That is true. However, as you can see here in the second bullet point, it says, it's not that it's untrue. It's that it's incomplete, right? And so what happens is that, yes, I do racism. Rebecca might do racism. Michelle does racism, right? Like we all individually commit to racism in some way, shape, or form. But am I the reason why the world is bad? Is Rebecca the reason why the world is bad? Is Michelle the reason why No, it's not about only individuals. It's about understanding that racism is not just by single people, but it's also a bigger scale issue. I'm talking about groups of people. And I'm not just talking about like a group of people like us in the Zoom room right here. What I am talking about is full official bodies of people, like organizations, like departments, like companies. You see like official groups of people who create rules and programs and systems that make racism automatic. And sometimes, as you can see here, as I'm talking about the racism scale, it is sometimes less obvious than individual racism. It is sometimes less obvious than individual racism. So as you can see here, when I'm talking about not racism, but systemic racism, I'm talking about systems, official groups of people, right? So we talk oftentimes about this blue circle, which is the individual part, and then we go into bigger and bigger parts, right? And so I think oftentimes what happens is that people may talk about individual racism, then they'll talk about, oh, well, it's in our culture to be a certain way. And I'm actually going to shift us away from thinking about culture, because people start to think, oh, well, Chinese people are just naturally like that. Black people are just naturally like that, without actually pointing blame to the groups of people that have made us a certain way. So with that being said, I actually want us to come up with some ideas. I want us to think about full bodies of people who create rules and programs, and they are a part of institutional racism. Right? They're a part of building systems. So as you can see, my first example is schools, universities. They make rules, they make programs, they make systems. Public transportation, buses, trains, Amtrak, maybe even like buying flights or whatnot. They create rules and programs. Immigration laws, right? Like the Department of Homeland Security or something like that, or immigration services. They create rules, programs, systems. I want us to think about two more. So I'd love to get 2 answers into the chat, and we'll have about 20 seconds. Let's think of 2 more answers, and let's find them in the chat. Health services, right? So like, actually, Michelle, I'm going to push you a little bit. Go even more specifically than government. What type of governments are we talking about? Health services, right? Like that could be a department. It could be even a hospital, right? So thank you for that, Laura, right? Like, so that's the kind of system. Can you get a little more specific, Michelle? Schools, universities, transportation, immigration laws, health services. Can we think of one more? Legislation. Okay, so like maybe like making, like lawmakers. You could argue like elected officials, right? Politicians. Are they always coming from a place of, I want to hurt people? No, not necessarily. But maybe we don't always realize in what ways we hurt people. And then it creates a hurtful rule. And then it creates a hurtful program. We're not trying to do it on purpose. We just don't even realize it's happening. And that's what creates that sort of like, as John was saying, like that sort of bias, right? Maybe that's what creates that sort of racism. So this is an example of that. So as you can see from here, I want you to focus on the very center of this, where we're talking about race-based beliefs and feelings within individuals. Maybe you realize it's obvious racism. Maybe you don't even realize it's racism, but it turns into the ways, as you can see in the interpersonal part, it turns into words and it turns into actions. I don't want my children to be around these people. I don't want to live here. They don't work hard enough, right? We're not necessarily coming from a place of, I hate these people, but it does still show up. And at the end of the day, whether or not we like it, all of us do it. And it's okay. It's okay if that is something that we do. I just ask that you make the choice to do something else. It's okay that you might think this way. I ask that you try to switch those actions and switch those words. One of my teachers had said, it's okay that it's your first thought. Just don't make it your last thought. And this includes myself, and this includes everyone in this Zoom room. Our beliefs and feelings turn into words and actions, like, I don't want to go to this hospital. This is a dangerous place. I don't want my kid to go to this school to be around these people. These people are uneducated. These people don't work hard enough. Those kinds of things. And because all kinds of people have all these kinds of beliefs, and then we all have certain jobs, some of us might have power to actually do something about it. They turn into policies, they turn into rules, they turn into practices. For example, this is an unsafe neighborhood. So I want to make sure that this school is hard to get into. And so therefore, I'm going to make an entrance test that is hard. Is that something one person can do and create? No. You need a whole school district to believe in those things. You need parents to believe in those things. You need a whole school to back it. Are they purposely trying to hurt other people? No. But this idea that we just thought about this neighborhood being a dangerous place and we don't want these people to come to our school, they turn into unequal systems. And then it just keeps happening. We don't even realize that this entrance test that I'm describing is actually continuing the inequality, continuing the biases, continuing that racism, realizing that we are all given these kinds of unequal chances because of people's beliefs. And again, is this only one person's thought? Is this only in one person's control? It's not. But when you get official groups of people to come together and do something about it, they do become institutional and systemic forms of racism. Health, education, banking, housing, crime, criminal justice. This is an example. These are just examples of those kinds of systems. So, something that I want us to think about when it comes to systemic racism, I want us to think about the fact that in America, oftentimes people believe that we have choices, but we don't always realize in what ways systems, like how I had mentioned, organized groups of people, have actually been a part of influencing our choices. I'll give you an example. So, as you can see, there are many people in the Bay Area and many East Asians and South Asians I've noticed, because as someone who grew up in the Bay Area, and they go into tech. Many of them have not only college degrees, many of them have graduate degrees. Oftentimes, people will use the following. Well, that's because Asians work hard. That's because it's our cultural norm to do so. Some people actually think we're naturally, scientifically, biologically, factually better at math. Again, how do these things get weaponized to justify unequalness amongst other people? But like I had said, many people forget systems that make us this way. So I'll give you an example. The example that I use are my parents. Why did my dad get into tech? Did he wake up one day, like many other Asians, and think, that is the best idea in the world? Let me just do that. Let me collectively do that. He might think that. but it's not really true. How are systems a huge part of this without us realizing it? In the 1960s to the 1980s, the United States created immigration laws in order for us to compete in technology, in engineering, in military and weapons design. They noticed that Japan was doing very well with development of cars and technology, computers, software. When the United States notices that Japan is doing quite well in technology and engineering, the United States then makes immigration laws from the 60s to the 80s, well into the 90s, to specifically target people in Asia who have college degrees, specifically in, as you can probably guess, math, science, engineering. You will get your green card if you promise to go to graduate school here and study specifically those things. So you see how like we almost like create that incentive. We dangle the carrot and say, hey, here, come here to the United States. And people think it's literally a choice that they make. Like, oh, I'm trying to give myself a better life. That's true. They are trying to give themselves a better life. But there was a system, right? In this particular case, the immigration system, right? The national government, the federal government of the United States creates a system to say, these are the people we want. This is what they have studied. This is how we'll get them to stay. And then we realize people who look like you and me were the targets. That we didn't all collectively wake up one day and believe that many of us should just wake up and collectively think that engineering is the best major for colleges. But it was incentivized by another system that nudged us into different choices. And what does that end up doing? It makes us believe that we worked really hard. Did we work hard? Yes, we totally did. But was that incentive given to other groups of people? It was not. We need to remember those things. Some people ask me, why do so many Mexicans want to do backbreaking day labor and farm work here in the United States? Did all Mexicans in the United States just wake up one day and say, that's the best job in the world? No. In what ways did the national government of the United States create a little carrot, incentivize people to say, if you do the hardest jobs, we will promise you citizenship? In what ways in Mexico, they did not make school free, right? So this is where you see school systems create things. School is not free. So many people do not have the chance to go to school. Did they wake up one day and decide that school was not a good option? No. But you see how this nudges us into choices and opportunities. So with that being said, I'm actually going to see number 3. It says many women end up as teachers. Did all these women in the United States just wake up one day and say that teaching is the best job in the world? No. What systems or what phenomenons do you think happened to make us this way, to make many women become teachers? I'm going to ask you to think about it and then put it into the chat. I'll give you about 30 seconds. Again, we did not all wake up one day and naturally think this was the best idea in the world. All right, that's been about 30 seconds. What kinds of guesses can we put in here? Ooh, I don't see anything in the chat. Maybe this one's kind of hard. Does anybody have any questions for me, maybe? And then we'll see where we can get through from here. Okay, teachers have a vacation break, so then they would have more time to take care of family, and then they don't make that much, so then men can still dominate the household. So you see, this idea that teachers have a vacation break, that's embedded within the school system, right? The school system creates the calendar. Did one person in the world create the calendar? No. Did a bunch of people collectively make the calendar? Yeah, that's like the school district. That's the whole school. That's all the administration, right? Who create the calendar, who then create the vacation breaks. And then we start to realize that it gives people to take time to take care of family. Now we start to see these cycles. And again, this kind of goes back to the whole, like, you know, bias versus racism thing. Like, did people wake up one day and decide, like, we want to screw over women? Well, some people did. But do we want to, like, in today's day, do we want to, like, wake up and screw over women? Not necessarily. But when we start to have these beliefs that, like, women are just naturally better with children, when we think, like, oh, well, women don't make up much money anyways, we don't realize in what ways that actually turns into rules and policies and systems that end up saying, hey, let's make sure that it's a shortened work day. Let's make sure that it's vacation break. Let's make sure that they have very, very relaxed maternity policies, which then, like I said, dangle the carrot. You create incentives to nudge people into that choice. So then what ends up happening is many women, it's not the fact that they all collectively woke up one day and decided that teaching was the best job, but it ends up becoming, there are all these little choices and incentives that say, this is probably the best option for me. I want us to also think about this again. Oh, never mind. Someone said, I teach in an IB school. Most middle years program, I was an IB teacher too, cool. Most middle year teachers are females. Most high school teachers are males. High school teachers get paid more. So like even talking about this particular phenomenon, did everyone say high school teachers are male and therefore we want males to win? Some people are like that, but not necessarily. But we start to see, like, in what ways this idea of, like, what is hard and what is intelligent subconsciously turn into this idea of who and what is deserving of more pay. Again, are we consciously trying to do these things? Not necessarily, but we start to nudge people in certain little directions, right? High school teachers getting paid more than especially preschool teachers, right? How are we nudging people in a particular direction? How do we create those incentives? High school teachers get paid more. The school system decides those things. Let's go even bigger. States, the state of Illinois, the state of California, they also help decide teacher pay. They also help create these systems of being unequal, right? Is it conscious? Not always. But what is the reality of what happens? It is. Regardless of whether or not we tried, it ends up becoming that way. How do we fight those things? Not as individuals, but also in terms of systems. I have some practice for us. Ryan attends a top-ranked, so I'm going to go through a situation, I'm going to read it out loud, and I'm going to have you find, where do you see the systems being unequal? And what are the negative consequences because of that? Here's the situation. Ryan attends a top-ranked school. Most students come from high-income families. Jamal is not one of those people. He attends a chronically underfunded, poor-performing neighborhood school, which has fewer resources, less experienced teachers, higher dropout rates. Jamal's favorite subjects are science and math, but he will not get the full range of math. He doesn't get access to AP Calculus or AP Stats. They don't have AP Bio, Chemistry, Physics. They don't have college prep courses at his school. So, like I said, we're not talking about individual people committing racism here. We're talking about groups of organized people. What systems come at play here? And what are the consequences? I'm going to give us about 20 seconds. Put it in the chat. What kinds of systems, programs, rules, policies you notice are being unequal here? And let's see if we can get multiple answers here. Okay. Socioeconomic impact status sometimes has more impact than race. Also, whether or not we like it, sometimes they're tied together, sometimes they're separate, right? So I think that's also important for us to remember. Socioeconomic status. Let's think of a system that creates that. So John, that's where I'm gonna push you. What systems sort of create that sort of like unequalness in terms of socioeconomics? So let's put a pin on that. Let's see what systems we can kind of put a play here. What other answers do we also have? That's okay. You can have more than one, you can have more than one answer. You can have more than two answers. And I think you're putting a point here in the chat. You're saying it's a complicated social issue, hard to pin down one or two answers. But remember, it's about systems. Maybe you're pointing out to something that there were a lot of systems at play here. And that is true. There are a lot of systems at play here. And maybe it's not just one system. Maybe it's 5 systems. Maybe it's 7 systems. And that is completely true, right? So you definitely know that one of these is the school district, as I had mentioned, right? That's a system that's creating like what is an option for kids. Another that you can also think about is the state, who determines funding in different school districts. You could also argue even city governments who decide on extra taxes for their neighborhood that then end up funding schools, right? Is it any one particular person? No, that's not the point. The point is what kind of systems we can think about. Something I could even argue is that like with the whole like neighborhood and extra taxes, maybe even an HOA, a homeowners association, that could also be a system that helps create this. Let's put in extra taxes to go into my school, right? But it's only one school versus like thinking about how all schools are funded properly, not equally funded, but funded properly. So I do have some other questions. I do have some other situations that if we have time for after the Q&A, we can totally practice them. But I do have a little bit of a bibliography for you for resources. And now is the time. I just want to respect what Michelle had mentioned. And does anybody have any questions for me? And again, you can verbally share them or type them into the chat.